I'm sure it's the same for you guys over at NBC2 as we talk about going into a hurricane season. You know, what theoretically would have to occur to maximize our storm surge risk here in Southwest Florida? And that sort of theoretical storm would be a large, major hurricane, a slow-moving storm, and one that makes landfall to our north into Sarasota County, for Lee County, right along the Sarasota-Charlotte County line. Ian checks every single one of those boxes. You know, we tell you every hurricane is different, and I know many of you watching this were likely watching our coverage leading up to Irma, and we showed you many of these same maps that showed similar surge numbers. And perhaps you're sitting at home right now thinking, you know, you guys told me that the surge was going to be 9+ feet in my backyard, but I didn't see that surge with Irma. You're telling me again I'm not going to evacuate this time. Okay, I want to show you this. It's the different paths between what Irma did and what Ian is supposed to do. And of note, Irma cut in right around Marco Island and then went right up 75. Irma, leading up to the storm, the forecast called for a somewhat similar track to what Ian is doing. All in the lead up to Irma, we were talking about a landfall near Sanibel in Fort Myers Beach. Of course, at the last minute, as often happens with hurricanes, this made a more northerly trajectory and came on shore in Marco Island. That difference of about 20 miles was all the difference in the world as far as the storm surge we saw in Lee County and Charlotte County in particular, because it took the corridor of onshore winds and kept it mainly focused on Collier County and to the East Coast, which, by the way, many of you didn't see the surge during Irma. Some spots did, including Everglades City, where we saw a 9-foot+ storm surge with Irma. So again, I'm going to take you through these maps, and you have to remember the way winds work around a landfalling hurricane. With Irma, as the storm approached, we had northeasterly winds, which drained out many of our waterways. As Irma came up, we had a brief period of onshore winds, but the storm was weakening at that point, so we only saw some slight water level rises. This one is moving more slowly than Irma. This one is taking a more northerly course than Irma, right along that course that we would consider pretty close to our worst-case scenario, if not our worst-case scenario, for storm surge potential. We go through this on the European forecast model, showing a landfall close to Boca Grande, right about the noontime hour here today. There's your onshore winds already kicking up. This is when, based on this model depiction, this is when the waters are starting to rise from the storm surge from the Caloosahatchee on southward. There's 3 o'clock. Onshore winds all up and down the coastline. There's 6 and 7 o'clock. We still have those powerful onshore winds taking the waters from the Gulf of Mexico, pushing them up onshore, pushing them up the rivers, pushing them up the streams, bringing that storm surge onto land. And note, because those onshore winds continue, and this is such a slow-moving storm, we could still have tropical storm force winds through much of the overnight. Those winds will keep pushing up against the coast. The water's going to try to go back out into the Gulf of Mexico, but those winds will keep it in place. And on top of that, we're raining all that water down. Where's all that rainwater going to try to go? Into those same streams and rivers that are trying to get back out into the Gulf of Mexico. So I can't emphasize enough the flooding risk we face here in Southwest Florida, and we still have a little bit of time. If you're still in your decision-making process, especially if you're in Zone A and you're in between, you know, do I go further inland? Do I stay where I'm at? We still have a couple of hours. I can't recommend enough to you to try to get your way out of the storm surge area. We start in Collier County. Much of this area is low-lying sort of marshland. So I know you're seeing 9 feet here, but that does include Everglades City. Really, as I draw this out for you, in Collier County, this is 41. Basically, everybody south of 41 here in South Collier is under that area of 9 feet of storm surge, 9 feet plus. Marco Island now seeing 3 to 6 feet of storm surge across the entirety of the island. Now, you might be watching from, say, a high-rise here in Marco Island, wondering if your high-rise is going to be okay. Most of these are built to account for storm surge, but the water comes in, and now all the roadways are under 3 to 6 feet of water. You're going to be stuck where you are for quite a while. So again, think about that. We jump northward. Naples, seeing a 6-foot+ storm surge. Downtown, we're seeing some pixels here, near downtown. 9 feet plus on this worst case scenario map. Again, I do want to emphasize that too. This is the reasonable worst case scenario, meaning not necessarily a forecast, but in each individual location, if all the ingredients come together for that individual location, what you can possibly see if that worst case comes out to bear. We jump northward into northern Collier County, southern Lee County. And note, again, it's not just at the coast. It's the streams, it's the rivers. There's the Imperial River. You'll remember during Irma, we had significant flooding along the Imperial River. That was from fresh water flooding, a little bit of surge. Significant storm surge flooding along the Imperial River there in Bonita Springs with those onshore winds. The water is pushed up into Ostero Bay. Now we're talking 9 feet plus being put out by these models, all up and down Fort Myers Beach. Sanibel. There's the lighthouse on Sanibel. There's the western end of Estero Island. Times Square, right here. Imagine Times Square in Fort Myers Beach under 9 feet of water plus. That's what this model is spinning out here. In the Cape is very susceptible to storm surge. That might be confusing to you because, you know, I'm not on the Gulf of Mexico. But, you know, the Cape is surrounded by water that's going to be forced upward by those onshore winds, and especially in the South Cape, where it's sort of sticking out into the Caloosahatchee, it gets in the way of where the water wants to flow, so it overspreads the land. And now we're talking, south of Veterans, a number of pockets, 6 to 9 feet of storm surge in this worst-case scenario. The northern motion makes that line bend a little bit to the north and east, so we do have a little bit of a deviation in that track now at this point in time. The center is still pretty close to where that would be, but unless the motion now turns to the due northeast, it is going to fall off that line and perhaps go a little further to the north. In fact, I've been watching the models coming in here this morning, most shifting a little bit. So I'm going to put my finger right here on where the current track from the National Hurricane Center has the landfall point from Hurricane Ian. And now I switch over, and there's the spaghetti plots. There's the model plots. So these came in here just a few hours ago. These were initialized just a few hours ago. There was a little bit of a shift. Now, this does not mean we're out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Guys, the storm surge, we've already seen plenty of rainfall, the high-end wind threat. Those are all locked in at this point. But what we're talking about now, as we see these shifts in the track, is exactly where does that core of the strongest winds go. But in the last hour or so, Ian has been able to fully reestablish its core, and with that, the winds have come up. You can see it on the satellite presentation. By the time we get to the end of this loop, you once again have a near-perfect circle. Furthermore, note the lightning flaring up all around the eye wall. That's a sign of intensification. Now, the hurricane hunters are flying around there right now. Jason and I just pointed out the fact that the worst winds are likely going to stay offshore. That's where they're clocking those 155-mile-per-hour sustained winds right now. But this core is organizing itself, and therefore, in the near term, we face an extreme wind event along the coast of Lee and Charlotte County in particular. That is our concern in the near term. Again, it's this ring of intense thunderstorms. As I track this for you, let me go ahead and dive back into this graphic. I'm tracking the edge of the eye wall. I'm keeping this on its current trajectory to the north and northeast at 10 miles per hour. Just some times that you should think of when you need to be in your safe place. This is when the threat for those major hurricane winds will begin to arrive along the coast. Wolford, 926. Captiva, 923. St. James City, 1015. Boca Grande, 1020. Sanibel, 1040. Punta Rasa, 1045. Inglewood, by 11:10. Fort Myers Beach, right around 11 o'clock. So you sort of see the timeline here. From 9 to 11 o'clock is when especially the Lee County Islands and coastal Charlotte County, you want to be getting to your safe space. Again, what is that safe space? Where do you want to go in your home? You want to put as many walls between you and the winds as possible. So go to an interior room with no windows, if you can manage it, as few doors as possible, perhaps an interior closet, perhaps an interior bathroom, and you stay there till the wind threat is done. So here's how this is going to work out as we get into the meat of this, as the wind threat picks up. We'll be tracking the edge of the eye wall. we'll be tracking the strongest of the winds, and we'll be telling you town by town when it is you need to be sure you're getting to that safe space. We can already see evidence of that surge arriving. Marco Island, which again is where Irma made landfall. So this speaks to the difference here in these two storms. It might not seem like much to you, the difference between a storm moving in on Marco Island or a storm moving in northern Charlotte County. But for our storm surge threat, it makes all the difference in the world. Right now, the center of Ian is about 60 miles off to the due west of Marco Island. That means in Collier County, South Collier County, you are now in southerly winds on the eastern side of Ian. Remember, winds are going counterclockwise around this storm. So once the center lifts north of you, now you have that onshore component. The 10,000 islands, Everglades City, I'm sure those water levels are already coming up for you because you have that steady southerly wind. Once this gets a little further to the north, now the southwest winds come in, and now we start to see that surge increase. I've been watching this closely. I showed you this a few moments ago. Let me zoom in to get a better look. This is the tidal gauge right at the pier there in Naples. Okay, here's what I'm showing you. This is where the water level should be, down at low tide in the next few moments. This is where it is right now. We're nearly at a 3-foot water level rise over low tide. And this is with a southerly wind, right? So we're going to get a southwesterly wind, and that surge will increase. It'll increase as we're headed towards high tide. So this is why these numbers are as high as they are being forecasted here. And again, this is for the Naples area, which overall, Jason just took you through, is not going to see the highest of the storm surge at Fort Myers Beach. I'm going to try to grab that full view for you. And you can go ahead and take that full once I do bring that up. Go ahead. Take that full. That's Fort Myers Beach, our camera. We're looking northward. This is from Diamond Head Resort to get your bearings. We're looking northward towards the pier. And you are starting to see the transition from high tide, from low tide, rather, to high tide. Again, this is a big part of the reason, too, why we're so concerned with these high-end storm surge values. Because right now, as the numbers are just starting to come up, we are in low tide. That is what low tide looks like on Fort Myers Beach today. And on Fort Myers Beach, you are just now starting to get a southerly component to the wind. You can sort of see. Look at the trees. Look at the trees around the condos. They're working out of the south and east. So the wind is still working against the waters there on Fort Myers Beach, and yet we're already, because there's even a slight southerly component, seeing those water rises. You know, even on a normal day, when the tides are a little higher than normal, the water goes all the way up to the restaurants there in Times Square on Fort Myers Beach. So it is not going to take much to put Estero Island underwater. And I believe I just saw a person walking there on the beach right now, which I would hope that person or anybody on Fort Myers Beach, as we head through the next couple of hours here and these waters begin to climb, if you've decided to ride it out on Fort Myers Beach, you see those condos there? Get to the upper floors. The condos are built, notice, they have sort of some built-in space for storm surge to rise. Because as we build here and develop in Southwest Florida, we all know the threat for storm surge. We're all told what the threat is for storm surge, and that threat is coming to bear here today as Ian moves its way in. I want to show you this, and you can go ahead and bring it back to me here at the pod. This is from Naples. I've been watching this closely, and every time this refreshes, we get a higher water level. We're at 5 feet now. This is by the pier in Naples. We're at 5 feet now. We're supposed to be at low tide. This is high tide at 3 feet. We are already about 2 feet higher now than our normal high tide at low tide. And the winds have just started to turn out of the south and west in the Naples area. So we already have a 5-foot water rise in Naples, and we're only now heading into high tide, and we're only now starting to get the onshore winds. The storm surge is starting now in Collier County. It is only going to work its way up the coast as Ian lifts its way northward. So again, we're just starting to see the surge. We already have the winds starting to press their way into parts of Southwest Florida. Lee County Islands, if you're not there yet, Sanibel, Captiva, If you've chosen, for whatever reason, to ride out the storm on Sanibel and Captiva, I want you to get to your safe space now. I want you to stay there through the duration of the storm as these winds come up. Now, as the hurricane hunters have been flying around, the worst of the winds have been on this northwestern side, which for the most part looks to stay off of our coastline, but the winds are still whipping there. Again, I just showed you 100-mile-per-hour winds from Tampa's radar. The winds will be plenty strong in those areas here, too. So the Lee County Islands, you are in your safe place now. Captiva, Sanibel, and up through Boca Grande. In the next hour, you want to be thinking about that into Pine Island. And as we go towards the noontime hour, Cape Coral, you definitely want to be seeking out that safe spot, too. Now, the water is up to the stairs there. The water is streaming inland. Those houses right there on the beach, water now likely rushing up to their doorsteps. And again, I can't stress enough, this is low tide, and this has just begun. So if you're watching from Fort Myers Beach right now, if you decided to ride out from any of these condos here, you are going to need to make sure you're on the highest floor possible. These waters will just keep on rising as we go forward, as the onshore winds begin to take over.